All right, I'm good to go. So whenever y'all want to get started, we can get going here.
All right. Okay. Is anybody not ready?
Oh, one question. Who's speaking first, app or neg?
The neg is speaking first.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you.
Anybody else not ready? Cool. We negate resolve. The United States to remove nearly all of its military presence in the Arab states of the Persian Gulf. Contention 1 is conflict. Subpoint A, terrorism. Terrorism is on a terminal decline. Romero 18 of courts writes that the number of terror attacks in the Middle East has decreased by 40% and the number of deaths caused by terrorism has halved. The US military has been crucial for this decline for two main reasons. First is drone strikes. Niva 17 explains that Trump has authorized a surge of lethal drone strikes, with Grammar 18 empirically confirming that Trump killed the leader of the Al-Qaeda branch in Yemen with an airstrike. This is critical as Grammar continues that leadership decapitations via strikes increase the probability of a terrorist group collapsing by 28%. Second is boots on the ground. Pollock 20 explains that the withdrawal of US troops would revitalize ISIS because of a lack of military pressure. Empirics prove. Brook 19 found that after the US withdrew forces from Syria, the Islamic State had the opportunity to rebuild itself and grow in power. Badowski 14 finds that unless defeated, just one terrorist group like ISIS will use its money to obtain weapons of mass death from corrupt government officials and launch a major nuclear attack on the US, causing retaliation. Kagan 16. Terrorist organizations accelerate the collapse of global order, encouraging America to overlook global objectives, overwhelming the US into provocation. Burroughs 9 finds that the conflict would grow, cooperation would be dissolved as world leaders pursue nuclear ambitions. Hellman 8 concludes, terrorism is a likely trigger of full-scale nuclear war. Subpoint B is Israel. The withdrawal of US forces in the status quo has corresponded with the rise in Israeli tensions. Herald 20 confirms that the rising tensions between Israel and Iran are developing against a backdrop of US withdrawal from the Middle East, making a clash imminent. There are three reasons why affirming would cause an all-out Israeli war. First is emboldening Israel's enemies. Aaron 19 finds that America's decision to disengage from Israel would embolden Iran and its proxies. Pollock continues that Iran would have a freer hand to operate inside Iraq and ultimately in Israel's own frontiers. Second is causing Israeli panic. Pollock writes that American withdrawal would make Israel feel obliged to increase its forays against terrorists inside Iraq, which would increase the risk of retaliation. Third is allowing for weapons smuggling. Schmeinhem 11 explains that American forces stopped the smuggling of rockets to Hezbollah in the Israeli West Bank region. And critically, Loppin 19 writes that allowing Hezbollah to acquire more rockets would boost their confidence and thus embolden them to take risks, ultimately culminating into conflict. For these three reasons, Aaronheim 20 concludes that should the US withdraw its forces, Israel will find itself in a war. Moore 9 finds that if Israel was ever devastated by any kind of war, it would retaliate against any actor, including Russian and European targets that have threatened Israel in the past. Russia would respond with nuclear weapons, leading to a global nuclear war. Subpoint C is Saudi Arabia. Ropra 17 finds that the Saudis view America's role in the regime in terms of a zero-sum game. The US either bolsters Saudi influence or Iranian influence. Saab 18 explains a US military departure would seal the deal and rapidly deteriorate the relationship. However, right now, the US is stopping Saudi nuclear proliferation. Guzinski 13 writes that American nuclear umbrella has remained preferable for Saudi Arabia over purchasing or pursuing any independent effort to obtain nuclear weapons. Timini 13 explains that proliferation attempts would betray the US and sacrifice the security that Riyadh desires to maintain. However, without such security, Cropsey 19 finds that Saudi Arabia would work to obtain their own bomb either by purchasing one directly or paying scientists from another nuclear state to develop their program. Edelman 11 finds that any attempt by the Saudi government to seek nuclear weapons would be destabilizing and result in a nuclear arms race. Emerging nuclear powers will not have second strike capabilities, forced to launch preemptive attacks. Launch authorities would be for low-level commanders. Without robust systems, there would be an accidental launch, and non-state actors or terror groups could easily get a hold of the weapons. The impact of these three subpoints is extinction. Star 14, with nearly 1% of the world's explosive nuclear power, the consequences would destroy the human race. With such long-term ecological damage, it would leave the Earth uninhabitable. Any conceded or drop linked to extinction after one speech is 100% probable. And for all these reasons, please negate.
Can we really quickly, can you send the second evidence under the Hezbollah link about like if they got rockets?
Yeah.
Yep.
Sweet.
All right, Jaden's sending it now.
Awesome. I'll let you know when I get it. All right, sweet. I got it. So Brentwood will run some prep starting now. All right, we're good. That was like 10 seconds.
You'll have we're doing 3-minute prep, right? I just like to clarify before every round. Cool. Just make sure.
Yeah.
We're ready.
Sweet. Everyone good? We affirm resolved. Contention 1 is lasting stability. Iraq is in the danger zone. Al-Monitor 19 warns that Iraq's political crisis is getting increasingly deeper, pushing the country towards further uncertainty and a possible political collapse. The U.S. military presence in the Persian Gulf is at the root of this for 2 main reasons. The first is parliamentary division. Mansour 20 writes that before the Soleimani strike, Iraq was moving away from its recent history of ethno-sectarian policies. However, Mansour expands that the strike threatens to reshape Iraq in a single stroke. The strike has recalled the dark days of division. Vantapi 20 extends that the U.S. killing of Soleimani led Iran-friendly parties and parliamentaries to harden their rejection of the U.S. troop presence in our country, further polarizing the country's political blocs between proponents and opponents of a continued U.S. role. The result has been a deadlock. This would bolster extremist groups, as Wall 20 warns that extremist groups could take advantage of the Iraqi government's dysfunction to once again rally people to their cause. Second is popular protest. Iraq's populace is dissatisfied. Kristen 19 explains that the protesters' overarching critique is of the governance structure in Baghdad, a structure shaped by Washington's nation-building efforts. Indeed, DW 20 explains that militia leaders are threatening to use force to oust U.S. troops from Iraq. Action by the parliament didn't go as far enough that the U.S. embassy should be shuttered. This is vital, as Kristen furthers that this dissatisfaction makes this a political unrest a fresh and urgent impetus to end American military intervention. The U.S. exit could signal a move towards meaningful reform that the Iraqi people want. The impact is a civil conflict. A surge in extremist factions and civil crises has empirically brought widespread disaster, as Odavani 14 quantifies that as the country was convulsed by insurgency and civil war, casualties skyrocketed to nearly 30,000 civilian deaths. Contention 2 is lasting peace. Even with Corona, Yemen is still in shambles. AFP last week explained the aggression between Yemen and Houthi rebels didn't stop, and until this moment, there are continuous airstrikes. U.S. military presence in the Persian Gulf is at the root of the continuation of the conflict by emboldening Gulf leaders. Hakoyam 18 furthers that Gulf states relying on an outside security guarantor allows them to sidestep resolving competing territorial claims, reconciling political rivalries, and addressing other issues, and instead adopt a more active, hawkish regional stance. Harlan 19 warns that the U.S. military bases encourage the region's leaders to act in ways they otherwise might not, safe in the knowledge that the U.S. is invested in the stability of the regimes. For example, U.S. support for Emirati and Saudi military campaign in Yemen. A U.S. withdrawal would force them to rethink their actions. Gonzaki 15 explains that despite its wealth, the Saudi kingdom is not able to cope with significant threats in its strategic environment alone. Empirically, when the US has chosen not to use military in the Gulf, Parsi 20 explains as the US appeared to push back in the regions, its allies' calculations tilted towards diplomacy. For example, Parsi writes that as a result of Trump's earlier a shooting war with Iran after the attacks against Saudi oil, Saudi Arabia stepped to direct talks with the Houthi rebels in Yemen as a way to ease tensions with their backer, Iran. The UN reported an 80% reduction in airstrikes afterwards. NASDAQ 20 sides with us that the talks have been going on between Saudi Arabia and Houthi officials on a ceasefire in Yemen since September. The Houthis want peace, as Al Jazeera 18 explains that Houthi rebels will halt all attacks on Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and is ready to institute a ceasefire if the Saudi-Emirates alliance is prepared to do the same. Unfortunately, Parsi 20 laments that when Trump ordered the assassination of Soleimani, the early signs of diplomatic progress achieved during the preceding months vanished. The impact is ending the war. Affirming is the only way to build a permanent solution. As Kristen 20 explains, that if Washington withdraws, it will give Saudi Arabia new urgency in its peace talks with the Houthi rebels. The U.S. departure could tilt the scales towards peace. Maintaining long-term decrease in airstrikes is crucial. As Thornberry 18 isolates that 5 million Yemenis children are on the brink of starvation in Yemen due to Saudi-made famine created by airstrikes that target agricultural centers. For these reasons, we affirm.
All right. On your
for
C1, link 1 on parliamentary division, can you send, I'm pretty sure it's the first evidence mentor that says it's caused political gridlock.
And real
Sure.
quick, what's the date on your first card on your second contention that says airstrikes have been increasing?
I'll check out the card to tell you like the exact date. Hold up.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
April 9th, 2020.
Okay, can you send me that card
Yeah,
as
sure.
well? Thanks.
What was the first card you wanted? Sorry.
Parliamentary divisions that the US is causing political gridlock.
Right, sweet.
While we're doing that, do you mind sending us the first card on your like Hezbollah link about the U.S. stopping weapon smuggling while we're doing that?
Yeah, I can do that.
Cool. Jaden, are you gonna send that one?
Yeah.
All right. I'm not gonna do anything. I'll wait for y'all's piece of evidence.
Yeah, I just sent it over.
Ashwath, are you getting both?
Yeah, I am.
Cool.
All right, Jaden, I got your email.
Yeah, I got it too. Ashwath, are you about to
Yeah,
send
I
it?
just sent our 2 cards, by the way.
Okay, then we can just start cross. I'll probably send soon.
Sounds good.
Right. Since I spoke first, can I have the first question?
Go for it.
So you tell me there's a lot of like political divisions within Iraq. How does us leaving the region solve that for that?
Right. So our first link shows you that the reason why there's a political gridlock is because of U.S. presence in the region, right?
Wait,
Like
I
we
understand
went in
like,
and drone strike their leader, right?
okay, I understand
One-
like we can't change the
group is,
past,
like-
right? So how does us
Right.
leaving like reverse this?
Because we remove the problem, right? If 2 people are arguing about like a problem and we remove the problem, then the 2 people won't argue anymore.
Wait, this is like
Like,
you're
does that
not
make
providing
sense?
me any solvency, right? Because just because like we had a war before, like doesn't mean it's gonna happen again, right? Just because we caused a problem doesn't mean you can fix it, right? What's your solvency here?
I mean, if we fix the problem, we fix the problem. Like
Yeah.
fantastic.
So how do you
like,
fix the problem? What's
like,
the solvency?
the U.S. was the reason that like
Wait.
Iraq's government is in a
Yeah,
political
I
deadlock,
understand that. Like even if we agree with that, like how do you
right?
solve that
If
for
the
that?
U.S.
We
was
can't
the
change
reason
the
why
past, right?
Iraq is in a political deadlock, right? Taking the U.S. out would like remove the political deadlock. Like,
Okay, sure. You can have a question.
okay, sweet. So let's talk about your impact on nuclear extinction, right?
Mhm.
So you're I'm sure this round is gonna go like nuclear extinction, even if it's like really improbable, is gonna have like a super high magnitude, which outweighs like the entire round, right? So like if the government tried to deter a nuclear war in like every single policy that it ever passed, then it wouldn't pass any policies because every policy that the
Okay.
government
Yeah, so you're just talking about policy
passes
paralysis.
has like a super small chance of a nuclear war.
Yeah,
right?
so the thing with this is the conflict in the Middle East is like way different from just like a chipmunk like walking across like the lawn, right? We know that the Middle East is very different with a lot of tensions, and like there's a lot of different actors in there, and we know that us pulling out has this chance of extinction. And we would say that like the policies made in the Middle East specifically mean that this argument doesn't really apply to the round.
All right, sweet.
So you talk about how you just sent me this card saying that there's like airstrikes happening, but like where does it say that the US has caused like these increased airstrikes? Like wouldn't you say that like the airstrikes just increased because of Saudi and Iran like just being enemies, or Saudi and the Houthis?
Like that's our Percy card, who shows you that the reason why the airstrikes, like, or like our entire case basically, is like the reason why the airstrikes are still continuing is because of U.S. presence. Like the AFP is just
the Parsi evidence like says the Parsi evidence concedes in the status quo there was diplomacy.
What? That's literally not what our Parsi evidence says. Our Parsi evidence says that in the past, like in 2019, when the U.S. like perceptually left the region, that's when Saudi Arabia like came to the diplomacy table, and then they like actually had to negotiate because like the U.S. left, and that that resulted in like an 80% decline in airstrikes.
I didn't receive the email.
I think it was just sent to me.
Oh yeah, you have to reply all on the email. Jaden, if you could paste
that is my
sorry about that.
You're good.
I'll just paste it in a doc so you don't have to resend it.
Whatever's easiest for you guys.
Yeah.
Or actually, yeah, whatever you guys want.
Yeah, I just replied it to all, so that is my bad.
You're good, don't worry. Give me a second to let it send.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you get the email? I think you resent it.
Yeah, just came up.
Okay, we're just gonna take a little bit of prep.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Starting. All right, that was 20 seconds. So that leaves us with 240. All right. So for the rebuttal, it's going to be framing. So a framing, it's going to be a decently long framing. And then under the framing, you can, it's going to be a weighing overview. So framing, weighing, and then on to AF substance. After I finish AF substance, I may go back and preemptively frontline their responses to the framing if time allows. I'm going to go decently quick, just to let y'all know. At times. Is anyone not ready? All right. Starting on extinction. Starting time now. Extinction outweighs in two ways. GPP provides two warrants. First is scope neglect. It leads people to underestimate existential risks they have not happened before. They are neglected by politicians. The size of consequences has no effect on the response. People become numbed when the numbers get too large. The decision makers treat existential risks similar to problems countless magnitude less severe, like my opponent's impact. Second, extinction would leave future generations with nothing. We must prioritize existential risk reduction because it's an intergenerational good. The benefits are also enjoyed by future generations who have to say in the political process. The problem's temporal varying. The current generation enjoys the benefits of inaction, while the future generation has to bear all all the costs of our mistakes. For this reason, Oxford 11 quantifies that even under our most conservative estimates, the expected loss of extinction is quintillion lives because of the loss of future generations. The value of reducing extinction by 1 million to 1% has a value of 10 billion lives. Consequently, even the tiniest reduction in existential risk has a value greater than any other ordinary good in the debate round. Now for a weighing overview. 1. Winning a link into the argument is 100% probable. If we win a link into extinction, we win the round. 2nd, prereq, no other impact matters if we win. If like everyone else is dead, no other impact matters. 3rd, a priori, the judge literally can't sign the ballot if they're dead. On to the app substance. On Iraq, they have no reversibility, no solvency for the problem. They don't win it. On uniqueness, Iraq has struggled with several reasons not associated with the U.S. The U.S. IP-19 explains that communities within Iraq have struggled with internal divisions not associated with the U.S. The U.S. has only worked to create peace. They've worked in Iraq since 2003 to strengthen institutions and communities to prevent violence from spilling over. This is historically proven. In 2015, the U.S. IP and its Iraqi partners carried out dialogue that led to the prevention of violence among tribes that would have made it to where it spilled into a civil war. Later in 2017, a similar initiative prevented a resurgence of communal violence, turned it in several ways. 1, the U.S. withdrawal leaves Iraq vulnerable. NOAC 20 explains that the U.S. troop withdrawal would leave it vulnerable to Iran invasion. This would be very bad because it would create an instability in Iraq. 2nd, U.S. leaving causes a civil war in 2 unique ways. First, it's terrorism. Dobbins 07 explains that terrorist groups seek to complicate the U.S. withdrawal, plunging Iraq back into a civil war. 2nd, is their internal instability. Dobbins continues that in the context of American withdrawal, Iraqi groups themselves will resume the civil war ended in 2007 with U.S. intervention. 3rd, a regional war would ensue. Dobbins continues that in the terms of external actors, all of Iraq's neighbors would go in to interfere, backing different champions within the faction, making it to where it maneuvers towards more influence and more conflict. 4th, U.S. withdrawal allows for Kurdish oppression. NOAC 20 continues that once the U.S. rebels completely gone, the Kurds will be more vulnerable within Iraq to oppression and be at the mercy of Iran and the central government. This is dangerous, as PSU 11 explains that there are 4.3 million Kurds in Iraq waiting to be oppressed. 5th, Iraq would lose their counterterrorism efforts. NOAC 20 explains that Americans in Iraq have been training and funding Iraq's counterterrorism service. If the U.S. were to withdraw, it would make it to where it undermines a reputation and constitutional blow to the Iraqi state of fighting terrorism. This is bad because U.S. withdrawal from Iraq will make it to where it resurges ISIS within the region, taking over the region, make it to where Iraq would be under ISIS rule, causing major displacement of people and death again. On Saudi Arabia, the Middle Eastern Monitor writes a week ago that Saudi Arabia knows they can't win. They're looking for a way out. Several warrants. A, Saudi Arabia feels isolated as its regional allies and no longer supporting them like the UAE. B, Saudi Arabia realizes that it can no longer afford the war because of economic costs in the long run. Zaman 20 explains that there is the first nationwide ceasefire in 4 years, indicating a desire for peace because they can no longer fund it. Reach of Newsweek explains in 2017 that regardless of the U.S. Saudi Arabia leaders know they no longer have the money to fund it. Indeed, Washington IT, the New York Times explains that Saudi Arabia has pursued quiet negotiations, making it to where it's actually decreased the amount of Saudi-led coalitions 80% because they no longer have money. Actually, make this group all of these responses Saudi Arabia, they work in our favor. Winter 20 explains that Saudi Arabia sent a message that it wants to de-escalate because there's been pressure from the U.S. Now for an advantage, Asian pivot. Perception causes American Asian pivot. O'Brien 20 explains the troops in the Middle East will be deployed to try to combat Chinese global hegemony. The only thing stopping troops from going to Asia right now is the fact they're in the Middle East. Glacier 20 explains that an Asian pivot would increase Chinese anxiety about U.S. containment. Hardliners would want military countermeasures to strengthen against the U.S. military presence in the Middle East, from the Middle East to China. Talmadge 17 explains that intensifying military competition within this region causes nuclear war because Chinese miscalculation would be in response to conventional operations that would be in the region, contrary to where they would be in the Middle East if we didn't move. Negate.
Really quickly, can we see winter
Yeah.
at the very bottom? Cool.
Mhm. All right, I just sent it.
Sweet. I'll let you know when I get it, and then we'll start prep.
Sounds good. All right, it should have just sent.
Yeah. Wait, that's Ashwat's email. Oh, cool. I just got it. All right. So we have 250 left. We'll start prep now. All right, we're good on prep. So I think we have like 30 seconds left.
Yeah, that's what I had you with.
Perfect. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay. So it's gonna start off on our case. I'll respond probably to like the framing and the weighing at the end of rebuttal. So I'll just start on like going down our contentions, and then I'll go to their case, and I'll like do the weighing stuff at the end. Is everybody good? Cool. All right. Start off on our first contention first. They don't implicate any of their turns to somehow linking into this massive nuclear war scenario. But we would also say all of these are non-unique because our monitor explains that right now Iraq is heading into a collapse. So even if the US is theoretically better for Iraq, it's not going to matter because it's already heading into a collapse. We'd say right now it's a try or die for the AF, but they don't really implicate any of these turns. Then, on our second contention, which is what we're going to be focusing on first, they say that Saudi Arabia already wants a way out because it feels isolated and it can't afford it. First, we would say it would feel even more isolated if the US withdrew. That's the only presence that's actually letting them support their war. Then they say they can't afford it, but this is just simply not true because Citizen Truth, less than a week ago, explains that Saudi Arabia just announced a new military campaign against the Houthis with the backing of US generals. It's empirically not true that they're running out of money. Then they say quiet negotiations reduce the Saudi war by 80%. That's our Parsi evidence too, but Parsi explains this only happened because the US threatened to pull back. Saudi Arabia realized they were alone, and then they reduced it by 80%. But then Parsi explains when the US struck Soleimani, Saudi Arabia realized the US had their back, and the negotiations completely collapsed. The only risk of Saudi Arabia ending the war is in the AF. That's what we've seen as empirically true. Then they give this winter turn about the US pushing for a ceasefire, but it's empirically not true. The US literally just supported their new campaign less than a week ago. On their advantage about a pivot to China, first, we non-unique it. Reuters explains that we're currently already increasing our presence in Eastern Asia. This is they can't quantify, there's no bright line for how much it happens, but we would also delink it. The resolutions about withdrawing our troops to the Middle East or not, we would say the easiest thing to do is just to bring them back home. They really can't contextualize this massive China pivot, and there's really no realistic scenario for a nuclear war. Then, on the top of our case, or their case, first about counterterrorism, you can delink it because J.D.L 20 explains that other nations would all step in to fight ISIS. Seligman 19 concludes that when the US left Syria, France and Britain sent additional troops as US withdrew to fight ISIS. That's why DePetris 20 concludes that Gulf states can manage the threat of ISIS without the US. But then delink it again. The US isn't even fighting ISIS right now. Kukas 20 writes that due to high tensions and divisions as the result of the Soleimani strike, American troops aren't even operating in Iraq to fight ISIS. That's why Hardig 20 concludes the US fight against ISIS is essentially over, which also functions as a term because Sufan 20 furthers the tensions the US have caused other allies to pull out in the fight against ISIS. But then you can pre-rec it because Walt 20 explains that a new version of ISIS is likely to rise because of this Soleimani strike, which gave ISIS remnants of a victory. ISIS can rally people to their cause because of the Soleimani strike, specifically on drone strikes. Turn it, because Boyle 13 writes that drone strikes foster anti-American sentiment in regions of the country and encourage people to join ISIS. That's why Boyle furthers the drone strikes in Yemen actually caused thousands of people to join Al-Qaeda. But then on troops on the ground, Tucker 19 explains that leftover troops were combined with Kurdish forces to fight ISIS. It's not, the US isn't specific. But then on nuclear war, Mueller 13 gives 2 warrants why terrorism won't be able to launch a nuclear weapon. It would take too long and too much money to transfer. Even if they stole it, they'd have to transfer it over a long distance while being pursued by security forces. He concludes the chance of a terrorist dropping a nuke is 1 in 3 billion. Then on Israel, delink it. A Gulf pullout doesn't scare Israel because Tisdale 20 explains a regional pullout would come with U.S. security guarantees to Israel and a mutual defense treaty. They'll always have Israel's back. But then there's a couple reasons why Israel won't strike. First, Keck 15 explains it'd be beneficial for Iran, it'd be bad for Israel. They don't want to also hurt U.S. ties, but also there's legal problems because Keck explains that Israel lacks Netanyahu wouldn't be able to because the lower bodies in Israel's government would make sure he doesn't. But then on Saudi Arabia proliferation, Littman 18 writes that Saudi Arabia won't seek nukes because the international criticism that would come with proliferating. But also Lano 7 explains the U.S. can just extend its turrets umbrella to protect clients in the region like Israel and Saudi Arabia. But then other countries wouldn't give Saudi Arabia the bomb because Keck 13 writes if Pakistan gave it to Saudi Arabia, Iran would be enraged. They'll never feel alienating Iran. Sorry, first really quickly on Hezbollah, their own evidence says that U.S. wasn't even really great in stopping this Hezbollah smuggling. There's a really, really low chance of this Panic. And then on emboldening Iran, we'd say the U.S. does it more in the neg world. So for these reasons, we affirm.
Can you send me your Israel responses? I didn't really catch those.
Yeah. That's my fault. I'm sorry. It was a little
You're good.
unclear.
And then once you actually,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll wait for Jaden to receive them before we decross.
So I'll send you what like I said, and then also like the card.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry about that. That's my fault.
All right, it just popped up. Jaden, did you get it?
Then I sent like one more about a security guarantee that I just sent. Sorry about that.
Not yet, but it should come up, so it's fine. You guys can start cross.
Oh, I may have. Okay, I sent the last response to just one of you guys. I'm sorry. I'm apparently bad at emailing.
Okay, I got your first email.
Okay, I think I sent the second one to you too.
Okay,
But
thanks.
yeah, if you want to start cross now, that's good.
Yeah, let's go ahead and start cross. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Do you mind if I ask the first question?
No, go ahead.
All right, starting time now. So are you just going to concede the framing and the weighing overview?
So we would say that in our world, if we're turning the region to diplomacy, that like lowers the risk of conflict on all fronts and like would also lower the risk of nuclear war.
I understand. Well, first, if that was like an argument you would have made, Jade and I would combat that. But like at this point, where in like your rebuttal, besides your like, because you do like concede the framing and the weighing, where in your rebuttal besides the turns on terrorism do you link into the framing at the moment?
Do we link into the framing?
Yeah.
I mean, like, if our parsity evidence indicates that when the US pulled out, everyone went to diplomacy, like conflicts lowered, Saudi Arabia was talking to Iran. Like, if we win that the region turns to diplomacy, we also win that there's like a lower chance of nuclear war.
So how is that region going to go towards nuclear war? Do you read evidence that indicates that?
What do you mean? How is like your case is about like different ways the region can go into nuclear wars?
It's
so we're saying
specific. It's like terrorism, Israel, like it's very nuanced. That's why nuclear war is nuanced. You can't just like be like, we shift the Middle East towards diplomacy and that just prevents extinction. Like that's a huge leap to make, especially without evidence or that like warranting that was in rebuttal.
Yeah, I'm just saying it. We do it better than you. If we win that, everyone turns to diplomacy. Like on terrorism, right? Like, well, I give responses to like why there'll never be like a terrorism nuclear war. But we'd say if they're like we fight better terrorism in our world, then there's like less likelihood they'll go to nuclear war. And on Israel,
so like
yeah, on Israel too
is a path to the framing. But I'm saying like your second contention on Yemen isn't, right?
No, we say it is because our parsity evidence indicates that like Saudi Arabia talked to Iran to like de-escalate regional tension. So like even on your Israel part, we'd say if the whole Gulf is going to diplomacy and Iran doesn't want to lash out anymore, and like Israel will feel like it's safer and have like less likelihood of like starting this massive nuclear war.
What evidence do you read that like Israel would feel safer or Saudi Arabia wouldn't go to nuclear war? Like you need to have an impacted out scenario and you have to have actual evidence to support these like ideas that you're like putting forth.
Yeah. Your scenario is that Israel gets scared of Iran, right?
It's three links. The first.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Okay.
No. The first link is not even that Israel is scared of like Iran specifically. It's that Israel knows that it no longer has its only source of support. It's like if you were to support a country with military aid for like 100 years and then you took that back. They literally have nothing to defend themselves.
So
they can't
on
just
that like
diplomacy in the region, which a region has been unstable like throughout their history to be able
on that first response, what I said was that if we pulled out of the Gulf, the US would accompany that pullout with additional security guarantees.
Yeah, a security guarantee, the Defense Pact, which is military presence. That's a non-topical response.
No, it's in Israel. That's not in the Gulf. Like we'd say that's what most likely will happen.
Okay, that's time. I guess we'll refute that. All right. We have 250. No, 240.
Sounds good.
We're gonna start that now. We're gonna stop prep. Can we go ahead and see the one piece of evidence you read on the China advantage? The starts with an R. It's something about increasing Chinese presence right now.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
I think I finally emailed it to everyone. I don't know why we're bad at email, but let me know if you get it.
All right, it just came up for me. Jaden, do you have it?
Not yet.
Should have sent to everyone. Let me know if you don't get it.
Okay, I think I just got it. Yeah.
Cool.
I got it. All right, we're gonna restart prep.
All right.
I think I have that down as all of your prep.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I'll be starting on like the framing and weighing, and then I'll go pro con. On the pro side, I'll be going the China pivot first, and then Saudi Arabia. All right. Is anybody not ready? On the framing, they concede Oxford that says that the value of extinction is sequentially evenalized because of all future generations' loss. So even if we decrease the probability by 1/1,000,000th of 1%, we access 10 billion lives, which is the greatest impact in today's round. They also dropped the prereq analysis that says if extinction happens, we're all dead, nothing else matters, and the a priori that says the judge can't sign the ballot. They literally functionally concede the extinction. Nothing else matters in this round except extinction. Let's go to the China DA, which they don't respond to very well. Their only piece of evidence is the Reuters evidence that increasing presence in the region right now. However, more presence in the region will increase the probability of escalation and linking into miscalculation. That's literally just deep mitigation at best. Like, we give you an increased probability. Extend the evidence. O'Brien says that when we pull out of the Middle East, we're going to redeploy our troops into China. They say that we're going to bring that back home. There's literally no warrant. This is just analysis. The O'Brien evidence gives warranting. The warranting is that when we're going to deploy our troops to China to stop the hegemonic power in the region. Then Glacier says what will happen when we redeploy the troops is China is going to become increasing anxiety and cause more tensions in the region. Which Talmadadi says that China will miscalculate our actions and that will lead to a nuclear war. Their evidence does not even respond. Like, they just give you analysis with no warranting, no evidence, and like we give you that increased presence in the region, increases the probability of nuclear war. This is the cleanest link to extinction in today's round. Let's go on to Saudi Arabia because there is no link to extinction here. Don't let them explicate it later in the speech. In Crossfire, they talk about diplomacy for some reason. There's no implication of diplomacy ever in any of the speeches. There's no contextualization what diplomacy means, how diplomacy stops extinction. Don't let them extend that. Also, diplomacy is only happening between, even if we do grant them all diplomacy is only happening between Saudi Arabia and in the Yemen conflict. It's not even applying to our specific scenarios that actually link into extinction, like Israel. Now let's go on to the con side. On terrorism, we can see the terminal defense that says there'll always be too much money to launch a nuclear weapon. Terrorism will never actually lead to nuclear war. We can see that evidence. Where we are, the second place we are winning this round is on Israel, because they try to say that with the TOC evidence that US is a security guarantee, even if we pull out. However, that's historically proven false. The Herald evidence from our case, which they don't respond to, says that tensions are increasing because the US is pulling out of the region and not supporting Israel as much anymore. That's why the uniqueness proves this argument false. Also, their evidence never even says that US security guarantee will ever stop tensions in the region, because they don't respond to our specific warranting from our links. Extend the first one, where the Iran evidence says that US pulling out of the region will increase Iran and its proxies, which the Pollock evidence says they'll be able to invade into Iraq and go into Israel territory, which will cause more tensions in the region. Second is not Israeli panic, because Pollock says us pulling out would increase retaliation from other actors against Israel because they have no backing from the United States, which is literally their biggest ally and only ally in the region. Let's extend the more evidence that says what will happen with Israel will retaliate against other actors such as Russia and Russia and European countries, and that would lead to a nuclear war. Star 14 says that even 1% of our nuclear power would lead to extinction. Their only other response in today's round is legal problems. The more evidence frontlines this by saying they literally ingrained into Israel's framework and constitution is the Samson option, which is they would retaliate. Governmental legal problems is literally not applicable into Israel's foreign policy. For all these reasons, please vote for the con.
Can we see Glazer really quickly?
Wait, which Glazer?
On China?
The yeah.
Oh, on China. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to look at it.
All right, I just sent it. All right, it says it just sent.
Now.
Wait, did you guys say you were starting prep?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I have that as time.
Yeah, yeah, we're good.
Oh, sweet. So the order is just going to be our case and then their case. Is everyone good? Sweet. The easiest way to vote for is on our second contention about lasting peace. What the AP finds that it finds that the aggression in Yemen hasn't stopped and there are continuous airstrikes. The reason why is emboldening Gulf leaders. Carolyn finds that when U.S. military bases are present regional actors that act in hawkish ways they otherwise can't, since the U.S. is backing them up. The U.S. withdrawing would make them think again, as Gonzaki finds that Saudi Arabia can't deal with threats alone. The only response is that this doesn't actually link into our nuclear, the nuclear scenario, which outweighs everything, but we'll get to that in impact weighing. That's where you can extend our historical empirical analysis. Part G20 shows you is that when the U.S. refused to get in a shooting war with Iraq, the Saudi Arabia accepted direct talks with Houthi rebels, and there was an 80% reduction in airstrikes. This links into our impact about ending the war in diplomacy. Our impact is stopping the fighting. What Kristen shows you is that a U.S. withdrawal would tilt the scales towards peace, and Thornberry quantifies the 5 million Yemenis children on the brink of starvation. This outweighs in a couple of reasons. The first is prereq. They try to ask, what is diplomacy? Diplomacy is agreeing not to nuke each other. At the point where the entire region is turning towards diplomacy and stopping airstrikes and stopping stopping nukes. We would say we prereq if we stop all likelihood of one country nuking another via diplomacy. We'd say we link into the nuclear war scenario. But second of all, we outweigh on probability. The scenario that Iran panics all of a sudden and starts lashing out against Russia and Russia and Europe is super duper unlikely. But what is really likely is what's happened historically. What Parsi finds is that in 2019, when the U.S. actually pushed back at the region, that's where we saw direct talks and progress towards diplomacy. But now on their turn about Asia and troops. First of all, what Reuters finds is that U.S. presence in the Asian region has been going up over time. They literally give no bright line at the point where we're continuously increasing troop presence and presence in the Asian region. We'd say this is a really murky way to vote. But second of all, we would say the fiat of the resolution applies to Middle Eastern troops coming home. We don't redirect troops in the Middle East to Asia and stuff. But now, on their case, we would say you can extend this all who shows you that when the U.S. pushes back in the region, it still keeps its its security umbrella. That's really crucial because we would tell you that delinks both their link 1 and link 2. We'd tell you that Israel wouldn't panic and we wouldn't be emboldening all of these people won't be emboldened to strike other countries if the U.S. security umbrella still guarantees them protection. And second of all, we would say we link in and we short circuit their case via our case about diplomacy. We would say Iran wouldn't be emboldened and Israel won't cause a panic if the region is turning diplomacy. Vote for empirics and for vote off. Yeah.
Okay, can we have the first question?
Yeah, sure.
So you tell me with your Saudi Arabia scenario that diplomacy is going to happen, right? So how does this act as offense in the round, right? How do you get offense off of diplomacy? This is just sounds like defense, even if we grant you everything.
Right. So your whole nuke war scenario with Israel is that either A, Iran would be emboldened to lash out, or B, Israel would be really, really scared and like Israel would lash out. We would argue the more likely scenario to when that happens is when there's constant conflict and no negotiations in the Middle East.
Wait,
But if like
let's
AF
clear
world
this up.
really quickly,
Yeah.
in like the AF world, like the Parsi evidence explains the last time the US like didn't engage, the whole region, Saudi Arabia and its allies went to the table with Iran and its allies.
You can't like
Like,
explicate this
even if-
evidence like super late in the round when the Parsi evidence only talks about Saudi Arabia and Yemen specifically. Like never once in the round have you explicated diplomacy on specifically solving back for Israel scenario or like a China scenario.
Right. Okay.
I don't understand.
China's
Saudi Arabia, they're very two distinct things. Your case from the onset has been Saudi Arabia versus the Houthi rebels. You don't give me an implicated scenario in which Saudi Arabia nukes the Houthi rebels or that the Houthi rebels nuke Saudi Arabia.
Okay,
You don't link it to
hang on.
regional diplomacy. It's Yemen war.
So no, but Iran is the Houthis' backer, and Saudi Arabia has allies in Yemen. So when they come to talks, it's essentially Iran and its allies with Saudi Arabia and its allies.
I mean,
That's
this would have
essentially
been
the whole
great,
thing.
like if this was a response
That
made
doesn't
earlier.
stop them
But
from
you can have a
attacking.
question.
That's in our case. Like that's like straight.
Yeah, I
from
mean, like
case.
it wasn't extended. Like you can just say it's in your case, but you can have a question.
Okay. So on this like China scenario, like are you basically just going for there's like a tiny increase in probability that like nuclear war happens?
Yes.
So like for every like one troop that we send, like you guys should win the round.
Yeah, like two things. Like first, you concede the Oxford evidence that you concede probability, and second, like thousands and thousands of troops are in the Middle East. I would not say that it's just like a small increase, but like even then, like at the very end of the day, you concede Oxford, which concedes probability. So you tell me that with the TOC evidence that like U.S. security guarantee like helps Israel in the region and like calms everything down, right? But at the point when you don't respond to the Herald evidence that shows like uniquely, like empirically, that like tensions were increasing when U.S. pulling out, why should we buy your theoretics over the historics? Yeah, so the historics are when like the U.S. slowly started to pull out, but our Tisdale evidence is specific to a full-scale Gulf withdrawal. Then we would increase security guarantees to Israel. Like we're not going to like have this like
all of our troops. The resolution is that
as nearly all. So that
okay. No, nearly all. We would surely like the Tisdale card explains that we would give a security guarantee. Like
really not.
Okay, that's time. Yeah, and I guess we're out of prep.
Yeah, we're out of prep, so we're just gonna go. All right, it's gonna be framing, weighing overview, the China. So yeah, framing, weighing, China, briefly on Saudi Arabia, but mainly Israel. All right, is anyone not ready? Okay. Starting time now. On the framing, they can see it the entire round. Oxford explains that decreasing the probability of extinction by 1 million to 1% of value 10 billion lives is greater than any ordinary good. On the prereq, they drop it that if we win extinction, then it prereqs everything else, and a priori you can't sign the ballot for all dead. On to China. This is the easiest place to pull the ballot. The O'Brien evidence says very clearly that the only thing stopping us from moving troops from to China is that the fact that they're in the Middle East. If we were to move them out of the Middle East, they would be redeployed to China. They don't respond to the evidence. The only response is that they have troops in China right now and that there's no bright line. Great, that doesn't matter. If you send more troops, that still triggers the glacier evidence, which they call for and don't respond to. It says that if we increase the amount of troops, that it would make it to where China feels that they're being contained and that they would lash out. This uniquely increases the probability of extinction because it makes it to where they are perceiving this conventional attack as a miscalculation. It would lead to nuclear war. They can see the impact scenario. This is where you pull the trigger in the round. On Saudi Arabia, it's really hard to vote for it because they do no link extension in summary that actually explains how it links into extinction. Their diplomacy scenario is Iran versus Saudi Arabia. Well, guess what? They don't read an impact on how that gets to extinction. But when you look to Israel, they don't win the prereq because it is only Saudi Arabia and Iran. That doesn't mean Iran couldn't still attack Israel and Israel couldn't still start a war with like Iran. The reason why you vote for J.D.L and I on this argument is on the Herald evidence, which they clean concede the entire round. It says that as soon as we start pulling out troops, historically it has increased tensions. This is twofold. First, Pollock, because it emboldens Iran to go in and attack Israel. This is not the Saudi Arabia scenario. It is not prereq. Second is also Pollock. Pollock explains that when there's no security guarantee, then it would make it to where Israel would lash out. Al-Khamenei explains that it would cause a nuclear war, and Moore explains that it doesn't matter even if they're secured. It's embedded within their constitution. If they attack or they're attacked, they would cause a nuclear war. Extend Star. Star explains with less than 1% of the world's nuclear arms, it would cause extinction because of a long-term climate damage. They do not respond to either one. You could pull the trigger in either way.
Okay. We're out of prep as well, so. Okay. It's going to start off on our second contention, then China, then Israel. Is everybody good? The only defense at the end of the round they have on our second contention is that we don't link into the nuclear war scenario, but we do, because we would argue with Parsi explaining that when the US threatened to pull out, the entire region went to diplomacy. That's Saudi Arabia, all of its allies, with Iran and all of its proxies. The reason that's really important is because, one, if Iran is going to diplomacy and lowering its attacks and lowering its intentions in the region, then they'll never attack Israel. But two, if Israel sees that Iran is lowering tensions with everyone and making peace agreements, then they'll also never feel threatened by Iran. That links into both of their reasons a nuke war scenario with Israel, because if the whole region turns to diplomacy, there's literally a zero chance of rising tensions in this nuclear war scenario. That's a prerequisite right there. The reason why AF solves for diplomacy is because of Carlin, who explains that the U.S. security guarantee is letting Saudi Arabia do the war in Yemen and be aggressive in the region. But Parsi explains that when the U.S. pulls back, Saudi Arabia realizes that the U.S. doesn't always have its back, and it has to go to the diplomacy table. Yemen proves empirics, because when Saudi Arabia or U.S. pulled back, they went to peace talks with the Houthis and Iran, and airstrikes decreased by 80%. The reason why this neg is really bad for this is because he explains all of the progress in the region made by diplomacy was ruined when the U.S. lashed out. When you affirm there's no chance of ruining these progress in these talks, we would A, end the war in Yemen, which is threatening about 5 million children right now, but B, this widespread diplomacy would mean there's no scenario for this nuclear war, and AF is better for this massive nuclear war scenario. Then on China, Reuters explains we've been constantly increasing pressure in China. There's been no signs of any nuclear war. This Glazer evidence they love to talk about doesn't even talk about this nuclear war scenario. They try to say just increasing tensions increases the probability of nuclear war, but there's literally no actual scenario to where the US and China start this nuclear war. You can't pull the trigger there. But then on Israel, not only is our diplomacy contention a prereq because Iran won't lash out, nor will Israel feel scared, but our Tisdale evidence explains even if historically small US pullouts caused an increase in tension, a massive US pullout would come with a security guarantee specific to Israel. Israel would never be scared, and Iran would never lash out because the US will always have their back. That means there's no nuclear war scenario there. Ours is the most probable way for diplomacy. Thus affirm.
Good round.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for judging.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, give me just a minute here and I'll have a decision for y'all. So Who was first speaker for Brentwood? Oh, wait, never mind. I see.
Neither, right? Yeah.
Okay, I got a decision here for y'all. Okay, so I start by looking, of course, at the framing. At the point where that gets conceded through the whole round, obviously I'm weighing everything through extinction and who has the best probability of preventing extinction by voting for them. I think that there's a key mistake committed by Brentwood, by y'all, whenever you focus all of your efforts on arguing that there is not going to be an extinction scenario coming out of the Middle East post affirmative ballot. However, you never showed that that there is an extinction scenario happening in the status quo, which is what you all would need to do to win my ballot under this framing. So like you would need to be showing that right now there's a high probability of an extinction scenario or a nuclear war scenario happening. And thus by pivoting to diplomacy, we are decreasing the risk of that. You kind of try to make that argument, but it never really is well warranted. And I'm not really getting a lot of justification. And it mostly seems to be happening by the time of like the summary seems to be when that argument starts to really solidify, which is almost too little too late in terms of really fleshing it out. On the other hand, I think that this China scenario, I think that Westlake is 100% correct that all you're doing is just mitigating the China scenario. You're not actually taking out the China scenario. And so there still is a risk of nuclear war. Even if it's a slight risk of increase of nuclear war, the framing says I have to vote there. I think that, so I do end up voting for Westlake off of the China pivot scenario. I think there's two things that Brentwood y'all need to do. I think one is that you really do need to attack this framing. I would advise to always address framing at the top of the speech because the thing is that if you win framing, it becomes a lot easier, especially in a round like this where they're putting all their eggs in one basket on extinction. If you can beat out framing, it pretty much doesn't matter what I look at in terms of their impacts, because your impacts are going to come first because of like, I would go with like something like structural impacts or something like that, like ongoing impacts need to be prioritized over hypothetical impacts, because like there's a bunch of evidence that talks about how like if we prioritize hypothetical impacts, we always put off structural impacts. Like that's the reason why like during the Cold War, you know, like we didn't really address civil rights very well because the argument was always, but we might have a nuclear war, so we got to focus on that. And so like the same thing goes for like the Yemeni children. There's like 5 million children starving. We aren't addressing that now because maybe there might be some possibility, like 1% possibility of a nuclear war at some point in time. So I think you need to attack that through that kind of like train of thought early on, and then focus more on like saying systemic impacts come first and like ongoing impacts need to be prioritized. Then the other thing I think that you all need to do is just like I was talking about is I think you all need to establish that need to try to find some way to establish that there is a risk of nuclear war in the status quo and provide some warranting for why there's a high risk of nuclear war now. And if we don't pivot, then it results in, or if we don't pivot to diplomacy, then that results in a nuclear war. So those are the two things I would have need to have seen to be able to pull the ballot for the affirmative in this round. What questions do y'all have for me?
That honestly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. All right, cool. Good round though. It was fun to watch. So
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Yeah, good round, guys.
Thank you.
Good luck, guys.